So Lance Stroll of Racing Point is on the pole for the Turkish Grand Prix around the very demanding Istanbul Park circuit. First thing has to be said is congratulations to him. A lot of doubters out there. I must say I've been a doubter through the years. I've never been a doubter about one aspect, which I'll get onto in a minute. And I think a lot of hats should be doffed to the talent too of guys like Tom McCullough and Andy Green and Andy Stevenson, all the real bedrock of that team that's gone through several guises and now, of course, is Racing Point and soon to be Aston Martin in the hands of Lawrence Stroll, Lance's father. A really interesting qualifying session. I was saying yesterday, a few people out there slagging off Formula One, slagging off the decision to be in Istanbul at all, the condition of the circuit, everything else. For me, it was a great day yesterday, watching bits of car control here and there. And today, as kind of predicted, there was rain as well thrown into it. So if you add very difficult to get tyre temperatures, really weird track surface, which was incredibly greasy yesterday and probably not much better today, plus the rain, it was mayhem. Basically, everybody was struggling for grip. Everybody was struggling for temperature, whether it be tyre temperature or brake temperature, or indeed balance between the two, front tyres, rear tyres. Nobody had it right, but some had it more wrong than others. I think that's about the best way to phrase it. And of course, some drivers made more of the situation than others. We saw Romain Grosjean going into turn one in Q1 about 1,000,000 miles an hour too quickly and then just stalling in the gravel trap. What a surprise. On the other side of the coin, you had Charles Leclerc and Sebastian Vettel crossing the line at the end of Q2. They just scraped into Q2 to find that they hadn't made it to Q3 by the margin of around 5 seconds to Max Verstappen, who at that point had been quickest. 5 seconds is not a question of drivers. It's not a question of anything other than tyre temperature. Simple, straightforward. Tyres are absolutely critical. If you don't have the tyres working, particularly the fronts, there's nothing really that you can do, particularly if it's wet. Q1 was an interrupted, difficult, fractious session as well. There were 2 delays, 2 stoppages due to cars out on the track having to be craned into somewhere of a reasonable position of safety. Kevin Magnussen at one of the stops, after the first stop, was P7 for Haas, enjoying the conditions in the sense that they were kind of an even playing field at that point from his standpoint. But of course, when practice restarted, everybody was out. He sunk like a stone. Now at this point, I should press pause and show you a tweet I put out after FP3 this morning when both Racing Points had been really quick when the rain started to fall and they went out on wet tyres. Really quick. Now, not everybody was out, so you couldn't take a definitive position there. But for me, the writing was on the wall at that point. If both Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll could go out in those cars and be as quick as they were out of the box on the wet tyres in the rain, then obviously they were able to get reasonably good tyre temperature reasonably quickly. And obviously as well, it was and still is a very drivable race car. Now that point was kind of lost on everybody, I think, even on Racing Point, because at the end of the FP3 session, you'd look at the times when they were out early on intermediates, and they weren't particularly quick. And probably from the point of view of both Sergio and Lance, when they went out on the wet tyres, even though the lap times were really good, they were probably saying, car feels terrible, car's sliding all over the place. So they probably didn't see the overall picture at that point. But I have to say, to me, it was a pretty clear indication of what was going to happen if the track did get wetter for qualifying. And that's exactly what happened. I think whether or not you were on intermediates or wets when it really mattered in Q2, Q3 is kind of a moot point. Much more important was how drivable the car was and how good the car was in allowing the driver to get temperature into the tyres in a way that made it drivable. And that is what Racing Point got absolutely right. I would go so far as to say that if Mercedes had stayed out on wets and hadn't come in for intermediates in the closing stages, the closing minutes of Q3, probably they would have gone quicker than they did coming in on intermediates and not really getting them up to temperature and not really getting any sort of balance in the car. That's obviously something we'll never know, but most of the people are saying to Mercedes, do you think you should have come in earlier for intermediates? My point is, I think they should have stayed out on wets. The pink Mercedes was actually working much better for the drivers in terms of getting temperature into the tyres than the black Mercedes. And why that is, don't ask me. That's a question for the engineers, and that's a question for data analysis over the next, not 2 or 3 days, probably over the next 2 or 3 months, I would think, because if they knew, obviously they would have got it right on the day. One of the reasons Lance Stroll is so good is because he's intelligent and bright enough very early on in his career to have consulted Rob Wilson and to have worked very closely with Rob Wilson thereafter. Even this year, right up to Mugello, he was doing days with Rob, and no doubt he'll be doing more days with Rob before the year is out. And very early on in the days when he was coaching Lance, and he still is, he would say to me, this guy has a Peter Revson touch. And when Rob says things like that, I know exactly what he's talking about. What he's talking about is the way Peter Revson won the 73 British Grand Prix when the oil came down towards the end of the race. And Ronnie Peterson, with all his car control in the Lotus 72, was not able to keep the car flat on the road, whereas Peter Revson had this lovely, gentle, silky touch and was able to keep all 4 tyres square on the road, passed Ronnie with ease and won the Grand Prix. It's what Rob calls flat car. Now, we didn't see too much of Lance Stroll when he was doing his really, really quick laps, and indeed his last lap, and you could say under pressure in Q3 because they knew Max Verstappen was out there on intermediates as well, and probably he was going to go really quickly in the Red Bull. But Lance was there in his own cocoon, and absolutely for sure, I can say this without any shadow of doubt, in his brain would have been all the catchphrases that he would have been working on with Rob over the last 2 to 3 years. It would have been things like, only brake when you've got the car flat. Only look for a change of direction when the car is flat. Gentle, firm on the brake pedal pressure. Little turn, big turn on the steering input. Come out of the brake pedal pressure at exactly the right rate as you're loading up the front. If the front starts to go when the track's a little bit wet, come out of the brakes, come out of the throttle, let the car settle. All these things that you practice a lot at Bruntingthorpe would have been going through Lance's mind. And that lap, for me, was a tribute to how good Rob Wilson's work has been over the last, I don't know, 10 years probably.